Testing.
Okay, thanks, Rick.
I don't think this is right. I think somebody messed this up. I always put this in line two.
Right.
Ooh. It's a new chord.
That's in line. You need a power. Where's the power?
The power's here. The power's there.
Oh, so that, oh, I see.
Yeah, I just, maybe this is too high. Let's see. I don't think it fits
We're
over
just
here.
getting the recorder working, but otherwise should be fine.
Can you
Yeah.
make sure I've got this, it's a new chord, testing. I always,
No, that was the wrong.
it doesn't go into line two?
It goes in,
Why is it making that noise?
is it,
I tried turning the volume down. This has
is-
never happened.
is the volume?
I don't know. Hey, Keith, did you see?
I think the volume was turned up.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, we're good to go. We're recording.
Okay.
Fingers crossed.
Well, we've got backup recorder here today, so we should be okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Happy New Year, and welcome to our January 6, 2025 regular meeting of the Township of Montclair Planning Board. In accordance with the New Jersey Open Public Meetings Act, adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by posting a copy of the notice on the first floor of the municipal building and by sending a copy to the newspaper designated by the township for notices. This meeting is being broadcast live on Channel 34 and is streaming live and will be available on demand on YouTube. This meeting is a quasi-judicial proceeding, meaning the board has powers and procedures resembling a court of law, and we are obligated to objectively determine facts and draw conclusions from them in order to provide the basis of an official action. Any questions or comments must be limited to the issues of what the board may legally consider in reaching a decision, and the decorum appropriate to a judicial hearing must be maintained at all times. Fire exits are to my right, which is your left, and in the back of the room where you entered. And first up is roll call.
Mayor Baskerville,
Present?
Mr. Borshoff,
Present.
Mr. Campbell,
Happy New Year.
Mr. Graham,
Here.
Mr. Ianwali,
Here.
Ms. Counselor Lockman,
Here.
Mr. Falaise is excused, Ms. Willis is excused, Mr. Neiman,
Here.
and Chair Brodock.
I'm here.
Okay.
Next up is our reorganization. We have a report of the nominating committee.
Well, I think 2 out of the 3 nominating committee members are here, and I think unless Dr. Baskerville disagrees with me, that we would go along with the appointees. Yeah, okay?
Agree.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so the nominating committee nominates as chair Keith Brodock, as vice chair Mike Graham, as secretary Janice Talley, and as assistant secretary Ms. Nazmi. Is that correct? Is that how you say her name? Yeah,
Hasme, yep.
yeah, I think that's it, right? Do we need a second?
I
or-
need a second.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Next up, we have approval of the minutes.
Yeah, we have the minutes from November 18th and December 2nd. I did not receive any comments on the November 18th minutes. So is there a motion to approve the November 18th minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? I did receive some changes to the December 2nd minutes. And Keith, you're right, I followed the order of my notes and not the order that some things actually took place. And so I have no problem changing it to the way it actually took place.
Okay,
Okay.
excellent.
This is a question for you. There was a comment about whether or not the there's a need for an encroachment agreement or an easement agreement for the air rights where the antennas will extend over the property line. I wrote down an encroachment agreement because it's encroaching
That
over
was
the,
what my notes reflected as well.
okay.
Yeah, I just wanted clarification, because it's usually, I've seen easement agreements, not encroachment agreements, so I asked the question.
Okay.
Thank you.
So other than that, is there a motion to approve the minutes
Well,
as amended?
did we discuss Counselor Lockman's amendments as well?
Oh,
Or,
I didn't think, yeah, the other, I didn't have any question about the
Okay.
changes, so.
I was okay with them as well. I just wanted to make sure.
Okay.
Okay.
So I move these minutes.
Motion to approve as amended,
There you go. Yeah.
and I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay.
Okay, next up, we have resolutions for our board professionals.
Well, before we even get to that, there's a somewhat unique resolution that I have not presented to the planning board before, and that is to amend the 2024 contract with Beatty Padovano. And that has to do with, because of the litigation, we didn't exceed the total contract amount, which is $60,000. It's just more, we spent more money on general services and less on the escrow accounts. So we have to adjust where the money's coming from. And we have money in the professional services budget to increase that amount by $5,000. So essentially, in order for the CFO and for the contract to be amended, we need this resolution approved. Counselor Lockman sent me some changes today to clarify it, and we worked together on making those changes to the satisfaction of the CFO and the purchasing agent, so. But really, the intent hasn't changed. It's really just to adjust where the money's coming from. So
You know, and my point was just to add some clarity. As a layperson reading this resolution, say 5 years from now, I wanted to be sure that that person would understand exactly what was happening.
Right.
So that's why we worked on some changes. But is the amended resolution what we're voting on now? Have people seen it? Oh, okay.
I didn't see that. I didn't see the.
You didn't see it, okay.
I think it only went to myself and Ms. Lockman.
I saw it as well.
Or you saw it?
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh,
did
you
they?
did too.
I saw it as well.
No, an
Oh, that's not
amended
it, Tony. There's a,
Did you see the amended one? That came today?
Yeah, it came today.
Yeah, it wouldn't come in a
No.
packet, it would have come
No.
through email today? No, okay. Would you
So-
mind reading, or just
I'll read the change.
read the
Yeah.
changes into the
We're going to
record?
eliminate paragraphs 4 and 5 and add a new paragraph 4, which will say, whereas after review of the proposals, cost, and other factors considered, the board awarded a contract to Beatty Padovano LLC to serve as board attorney for 2024 for an initial term of 1 year for an amount not to exceed $60,000. This was composed of $25,000 for general services, budget line 01-201-21-181-028, and $35,000 for application reviews paid through escrow fees, budget line 03-27056-018-001. The 2024 general services expenses have exceeded $25,000 because of unanticipated litigation costs. Therefore, the amount in the contract paid from the municipal budget must be increased by $5,000, and the amount in the contract paid from the escrow budget line must be decreased by $5,000. That was it.
Anyone have questions on the revisions?
So this is the year 24 versus, what's the year for the town? It goes to June?
No, no, it's
The
the
budget.
Both the
calendar year.
Both- okay.
So the contract ends.
It's all for last year, though?
Yeah, and so we just had, we're almost at the end, and we went over the amount that was coming out of the professional services budget. But we had money to cover it.
I do have a question for you. The amount that's, is it 35,000 that's in the escrow budget line? That is something we get reimbursed for, correct?
No, the money's already there. The applicants post escrow when they submit their application.
Yes,
and
okay,
whenever-
right.
So, and that's why it's a separate account. Each application has its own bank account.
Yep,
and we pay his bills from that separate bank account.
And if the escrow that they've posted is greater than it needed to be, then at some point it's subtracted from the escrow budget line?
Well,
You give the money back to the
oh, yes,
applicant?
we give the
Yeah,
money.
so
we give
there's
the
an
money back to the
adjustment, yeah.
applicants, or we ask for more money. So the problem is, when we do the contract at the beginning of the year, we have to keep a total amount to be paid through escrow that's part of the contract. So it's a guess.
Okay, yeah, I get it. And then is there some adjustment made at some point? I'm just asking because, we'll be looking at the budget shortly.
I
and-
know. Well,
Yeah,
this is, it's
I'd
kind
just
of
like to
unique.
understand
This is
this.
really unique to board applications, because
Oh.
other items in the township, to my knowledge, don't have escrow
Escrows
accounts.
accounts,
You're not paying bills through these various different accounts, like
Okay.
we are.
Thank you.
Okay. So is there a motion to approve this as amended?
Motion to approve as amended.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The next item on my list is a resolution to renew the contract with Beatty Padovano for 2025. Again, this is a little bit different than we've done in the past years. As we discussed last year, the way we issued the RFP through competitive contracting, it allows us to enter into a contract for 1 year, renewable for 4 years, for a total of 5. So this would be the second year. And what this does is, there's no change to the amount, although I believe your hourly rate went up for applications by $5 an hour. So that was the only change. So if there's and it just extends the contract to include 2025. Are there any comments? Is there a motion to approve this contract? This resolution?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Yes.
Congratulations, Art.
We have a resolution here to extend the contract with Eric Bernstein and Associates. He's only been to one meeting, I think, because we haven't had that many conflicts. But again, if there is a conflict, we need to have an attorney to cover those meetings. There is no change in their rates for 2025. So is there a motion to extend the contract for Eric Bernstein Associates?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
So why do we get a separate law firm rather than using someone in Art's office?
In who?
In Art's office, is there a conflict? You're the only one?
My firm.
Oh, your firm is conflict. Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah. Duh.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
Need me to repeat that again? My microphone wasn't on.
The next resolution is to extend the contract with Neglia Engineering to serve as board engineer for 2025. Again, there's been no changes to their rates for this year.
Motion to approve renewal.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. And the last one is to extend the contract with Level G Associates, our parking experts, who, lucky for us, we didn't have to bring them in for anything last year because it wasn't that busy. There's been no change in their rates either. So is there a motion to extend the contract for 2025?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Okay. That brings us to old business with the continuation of application 2903, 1 Seymour Plaza.
Good evening and Happy New Year, Mr. Chairman, fellow members of the board. Once again, for the record, Richard Schneider of the law firm of Vogel, Chait, Collins, and Schneider on behalf of the applicant Verizon Wireless. As the board will recall, we were before you back at the board's December meeting, at which time we presented two of our anticipated three witnesses, that being Mr. Andy Peterson, the applicant's RF engineer, and Mr. Frank Colacerto, the applicant's architect. Both of their respective testimonies were completed, although the board did ask that both witnesses return just in the event that there was any further questions. They are both here this evening and have returned as the board requested. It was my intention this evening to hopefully conclude the matter by the presentation of our expert witness in professional planning, Mr. Dave Carlback, which I intend to do. The only, I think, housekeeping item, which I think we addressed, as the board will recall, without getting into all of the details, there might have been some questions concerning the levels of electromagnetic fields as it related to Mr. Peterson's testimony relative to the fact that his original report referenced 9 antennas, whereas 12 is proposed, and as requested, Mr. Peterson submitted a updated report dated December 11, 2024, confirming that it is the exact same measurement, whether it's 12 antennas or 9 antennas that was submitted, dated December 11, 2024. I defer to the board whether we need to mark that as a separate exhibit, and if you give me a
We
sec.
should.
I think we're up to 14.
That's what I was about to check. but-
A14.
Okay, so we'll mark that as Exhibit A14. And unless there's any questions, in the interest of time, I'm prepared to proceed with Mr. Carlback.
Are there questions from the board on the updated report?
Yeah, I had one
Counselor.
question. Looking at the December 11th report, this is maybe, anyway, you say that the FCC exposure limit at all ground level locations are such and such. Now, is that distinguished from levels that are higher up? Because this,
I'll let Mr. Peterson answer that as compared to me.
Mr. Peterson, you recognize you remain under oath?
I do.
Good.
so my concern is this, the antennas are on top of this building, and you're stating that the radiation levels at the ground level are such and such. But right next to Seymour Street is an apartment building, maybe 4 or 5-story apartment building. Are the same or less levels of radiation greater or lesser from if you're living in that apartment building on an upper story?
So I took a look, in light of our discussion at the last meeting, I took a look at the neighboring buildings. There's the Wellmont Theater to the north, the Seymour Apartments to the southwest.
Your microphone may not be on, Mr. Peterson.
I think it's on now. I'm
Sounds
sorry.
much better, thank
Should
you.
I go through for the
Yes.
record? Yeah, so I did take a look at the adjacent rooftops, the Wellmont Theater, Seymour Apartments, and then across the way there's another 70-foot-ish tall building, and the closest being the Seymour Apartments to the southwest. And I looked at that from a worst-case type of scenario, someone on the rooftop, and I think that was some of the discussion last time, someone who's up there as by virtue of their occupation. And I did examine that rooftop. It's about 50 or 55 feet tall, but it does have a significantly increased ground elevation. So relative to our building, we still, it is still lower than our building by about 15 feet or so, or than the antennas. So the vast majority of the energy is directed over the building. But there is an elevated, relative to the ground, there's an elevated level on the rooftop, but still would be within strict compliance
Okay.
with the FCC guidelines.
Right, yeah, you were very specific in saying ground level. So there is a difference then in what you're saying?
Yeah,
between them.
there is, and,
Okay.
generally as you...
But it's still fine, yeah?
Yes, it's still in strict
Within a
compliance.
range, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And would that hold true for residents of the building as well?
Oh, yeah. There's a significant decrease as you then decrease in elevation. It's only when you are elevated close to the center line of the antennas, and then within 10 or 15 feet of those antennas where you are potentially can exceed the FCC guidelines for exposure. So in this case, we have a lower rooftop, which is, I don't know, probably 30 feet away. And the antennas are actually pointed somewhat, they're kind of pointed southeast there, and that rooftop is generally southwest, so we're not in the main beam. So there's a whole lot of contributing factors there. But I did look specifically at that rooftop.
And the exposure is only the direction that the antenna is pointed, correct? So if somebody's on the rooftop and the antenna is pointed away from them, they're not exposed? Is that accurate?
Correct, yeah. If you're on, let's say you're on our rooftop.
Yeah.
Then you have basically the back lobe of the pattern, which is significantly attenuated. Yes, so on a rooftop, if you're on the rooftop where the antennas are, the exposure is generally very low.
And within those strict guidelines, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Just
So is it fair to say that the energy that is emitted from these antennas proceeds out in a more or less conical fashion?
It does, yes. That's a fair statement.
Counselor?
So you keep saying the rooftop of those buildings. I'm kind of concerned about people who live in those apartments. So there's less exposure to them living in the apartments than, because no one's hanging out on the roof, really.
Right.
So what we're concerned about is people who live in their homes there. And we
Yeah,
should,
Sorry.
we should not be concerned, according to what you're saying here.
Well, the levels will be significantly lower than what I examined on the rooftop because we're now below, we're
Yeah.
now at a lesser elevation. And then there's significant building material, windows.
So windows block out?
Yeah,
from the- oh, they
to a
do?
certain
Okay.
extent, but certainly,
I mean, I don't know anything about this. So you're saying the windows block it out and the height matters?
Yeah, the height matters.
Okay.
And if the logical question, what if someone has their windows open? Sure. But you're still lower than the rooftop, which is what I examined, which would be the worst case scenario.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions from the board?
Well, I'll make the same point as I did before. We're not empowered with determining whether or not these are safe for people. This is not our mission, right? So this is just FYI, and we're just looking at the zoning aspects of this. So this, okay.
We have the report, so you expect you read the report, you have some questions, that's all
But I
that I'm
mean,
really
with
saying.
respect to
yeah.
what we're empowered to do, I mean,
Well, I
if we-
think health and safety is within our purview.
it is?
Yeah, absolutely.
It
Okay, it's not the
is.
building department?
It is, however, this area has been essentially taken by the federal government.
Right, so as long as it complies with the FCC
Correct.
guidelines, but if it were to be over it or a concern, that would be something we could handle as a board.
If there were such a concern.
Correct. Correct, and it doesn't appear to be with this application.
yes, I would say so.
So then, from a regulatory standpoint, does this, if they are, the agency which handles it, I think I might have asked this question before, do you make an application to them, to the FCC, for approval?
Now, there's no individual site-by-site application made
Okay.
to the FCC. They do, however, regularly audit Verizon's internal electromagnetic emissions compliance program.
Oh, as a company, all right.
Yeah, so they will, with a concentration on the rooftop sites, because they are, with towers and more traditional sites, the antennas are elevated from the ground, there's not much around. But with rooftops, with worker safety, so they are audited regularly.
And I just have one more, the power out of this compared to a 5G on a relative basis. This is much more powerful. I'm just totally curious about this because we have an ordinance. How much power comes out of this versus a 5G installation?
So
For
this,
energy.
this facility will be equipped with 5G.
Oh, there'll be 5G on it.
Yeah,
But
radios.
it's got other stuff too, right?
Yeah, it has some 4G, some 5G. It's all relatively low power, more akin to two-way radio operations like public safety than it is to, let's say, FM or AM or television broadcast, which can be tens of thousands of watts. We transmit with radio powers on the order of 100 watts. 300 watts is the maximum power of one of the radios, 320
All right.
watts.
Thanks for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Of course, I want to make sure everybody's questions are answered here.
I do, that raises another question with me. Yeah, you just said there are 5G installations on this rooftop, and we just went through and approved a 5G ordinance. Does that ordinance apply to this at all?
No, the
No?
5G ordinance is specifically addresses wireless, small cell wireless
small.
facilities
In
in
the
the
right of
public
way.
right of
Yeah,
way.
yeah,
And this is on
gotcha.
private property.
Thank you.
Those facilities are intended to deal specifically with the public right-of-way as distinct from a location on a private building.
Right.
Thank you.
And the focus here would primarily be for people outside and on the road and not residents living in buildings or anything like that, right?
As far as for service improvement?
Correct.
Well, yeah, I mean, it will improve service for Verizon Wireless customers in a decent area surrounding the site, including residents that could be in neighboring buildings and folks working in neighboring buildings. But yes, the surrounding areas where folks are traveling, folks are, where they're pedestrians, et cetera.
But would provide relief to those people working and residing in the buildings, correct?
Yes, it would.
And just one more question. Is it anticipated that there will be other companies similar to Verizon that will be having their equipment co-joined with you, or in the same location as yours, or this is strictly Verizon, or you don't know?
I couldn't comment on what a competitor such as AT&T or T-Mobile would or wouldn't do. We wouldn't be privy to specifically the proprietary nature of their network. All I can say is that there would be nothing which would effectively preclude
So it's a possibility.
their use of the same
Yeah.
building. In fact, it is not uncommon
Right.
that competitors locate on the same rooftop, and I think you may have that scenario elsewhere in your town. But there's nothing legally, design-wise, or radio frequency-wise which precludes or prohibits use of the same structure for multiple carriers.
But would they have to, if that were to happen, AT&T, would they have to come to us, or do they just have a separate relationship with
that's
the
a-
building owner?
They would come to you,
They would, okay.
because that's the way it's written in the redevelopment plan.
Oh, I see. Oh, so that's what triggers them
Yes.
having to come to us, nothing in
Yes.
our ordinances.
We amended the redevelopment plan with specific requirements for wireless facilities. So they would have to come to you for site plan approval, just like this application did.
Okay, thank you.
Just going back to the audit comment for a moment, how will this board or the township be kept abreast of, what sort of standing Verizon is in?
With respect to an
The
FCC
audits.
audit?
Yeah, like if you're in compliance, out of compliance, like how do we, what happens from here?
I mean, in my experience, I don't know of a Verizon audit that has turned up anything out of compliance.
Yeah.
I mean, so I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
But Verizon is required by their licensure to maintain these facilities within compliance. So if there was something that was audited and failed an audit, they would address it immediately.
I'm sure. I appreciate the confidence. I think it'd be helpful just as a measure of just awareness to understand like how that process flows through. We don't have to answer it now, but I just think seems like it's pertinent information.
I'll do my best to get an answer to that.
Okay.
So I guess is the question, are individual site owners or
What happens?
municipalities made aware of any
Or
audit?
are those FCC audits made publicly
Public,
available?
yeah.
Just even generally speaking,
Yeah.
if I may.
Yeah.
To speak for you.
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but I can find out.
Okay.
Other questions from the board?
Yes. Mr. Peterson, based on your experience, the equipment that Verizon is using on this application has a certain level. I think your letter says 0.14%. Are you aware of whether or not other companies use equipment where that level is higher than that?
So the AT&T and T-Mobile equipment, and really Dish Network, those are the three other providers in the marketplace. They don't use the same equipment. They
Right.
may have a different equipment manufacturer that they prefer, et cetera. They may have different antenna manufacturers they prefer. But the output powers are all very similar for the radios. The antenna gains are very similar. They're working with the same set. They're working out of the same toolbox, essentially. It's all the wireless infrastructure equipment that's out there. So it may not be identical, but it is very similar in power and gain of antennas. So that would yield similar results for, let's say, another installation that was on the building.
So getting back to Councilor Lochman's question, there wouldn't be a situation where if there were multiple antennas from all the carriers in one location, that would itself make the level higher or high enough to cause some sort of issue that people wouldn't be aware of.
I wouldn't anticipate that. No, and similar to Verizon, the other carriers have internal audit processes. I assume they'll have to provide a compliance report to this body that demonstrates compliance not only of their equipment but what's existing. So, no, I wouldn't anticipate that.
Thank you.
Is that output potentially likely to change as the system gets upgraded throughout the years?
Well, over the past 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, really, at this point, there's been a constant evolution in the technology and the frequency bands used. No one has a crystal ball, obviously, but if trends remain, Verizon will likely seek out more radio waves, more licensed bands to transmit in, and that could marginally increase the levels, but similar to the prior point, not to a level that I would anticipate would exceed. And again, there's the internal audit process. There is requirements for compliance demonstration. Sure. Any other questions from the board? No? Counselor?
Mr. Callback?
Sir, do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Would you please state your full name and business affiliation for the record?
My name is David Carlbach, Karlebach. I'm the president of David Carlbach PPPC, and my business address is 2 Executive Drive, Fort Lee, New Jersey.
Mr. Callback, you are a licensed professional planner of the state of New Jersey?
Yes, and I have been licensed for 30 years.
Okay, and can you briefly provide the board with the benefit of your education and experience?
Certainly. I have a master's degree in city and regional planning from Rutgers University. As I said, I'm currently licensed. I provide planning testimony almost on a nightly basis here in New Jersey. I've been before this board many times in the past, and I'm currently the Joint Planning Board planner in Rivervale, New Jersey.
And obviously, in conjunction with your capacity of having testified so many nights, your testimony has been accepted as that of an expert witness in the field of professional planning, more times than you care to remember. Correct?
Yes, probably, yeah, over 1,000 times, and also in Superior Court and Federal Court.
Mr. Chairman, I offer Mr. Callback as an expert witness in the field of professional planning.
We'll accept them.
Thank you. Dave, let me just take a couple of moments just to have you put on the record what you may have done and what you may have reviewed in preparation for your testimony. You've had the opportunity to review the site plan that has been presented before the board, correct?
Yes.
And you are familiar with the visual analysis that likewise has been submitted as part of this application, correct?
I am. I didn't personally prepare the exhibits, but I have reviewed them with Mr. Kronk, who did prepare them, and I believe them to be accurate and correct.
Okay. And you are familiar with the respective review reports that were issued by Ms. Talley, as well as the HPC and other review memorandum, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And you've had the opportunity, at least as it relates to the amendment to the plan, the Seymour Street redevelopment plan, you've reviewed that as it relates to the recent amendment permitting wireless communications, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you did attend the initial public hearing?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Without me at least initially interrupting you, for purposes of the record, let's describe the site and the existing surrounding land uses with the obvious understanding that the board is, I'm sure, intimately familiar with both the site and the surrounding land uses.
Right, and we covered a lot of ground in the last meeting, so I think I'm just going to iterate what the board planner said in her review memo to the board, that this property is an interior lot located between the Wellmont Arts Plaza and the South Fullerton parking lot, and it is within the Seymour Street redevelopment plan area. The property does contain a 5-story parking garage with 2 stories of offices above, and that's occupied by Summit Health.
Okay. With that background, Dave, let's, for purposes of the record, at least from a planning perspective, describe that which is proposed.
Right. I think Mr. Colasado's testimony pretty much covered all the, I guess, the nuts and bolts of the system, the types of antennas and ancillary equipment that are being proposed. I don't have much to add to that other than to, I guess, remind the board, because you're familiar with these types of applications, but for a macro cell site, this only contains 1 equipment cabinet, which is unusual. Normally, with an application such as this, you'll see 3, 4, or 5 cabinets. So in terms of the infrastructure that's required, this is much less than you would see with similar type applications. And also, this facility uses electric service and telephone service similar to what you would see for a single-family home. And there's absolutely no site grading or tree removal required with this facility.
And as I alluded to in my opening remarks, and critical for purposes of this application, this property is in part of the Seymour Street redevelopment plan, and the relevant zoning as it relates to that is reflected in a amendment to the plan to permit wireless telecommunications specifically on this building. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And that is, I assume, in your capacity as a professional planner, a significant planning consideration, with the obvious understanding that oftentimes, I'm sure you're coming before various boards, albeit not planning boards, where you're seeking variance relief because the use is not permitted. But the critical point here from a planning perspective is that the use is permitted by virtue of specific acts undertaken by the township, correct?
Right. So we're not wrestling with the question of whether or not this is an appropriate site for the use. It is. The governing body has said so. We're more looking at the C variations or C variances, which I consider to be minor in nature, and certainly the design is in keeping with the spirit of the ordinance. So I can review with the board those deviations that are required. The first one is that the antennas mounted on the alpha and gamma sectors will be flush mounted to the building, and they're going to extend 1 foot above the height of the existing parapet. So a variance is required for each one of these antenna sectors, and both the alpha and gamma sector antennas are located at the northwest corner of the building. The second variance is that the height of the mechanical equipment is 84 feet from the ground elevation, and the ordinance permits a maximum height of 80 feet above ground elevation for equipment. And I believe we've added a third variance since our initial hearing, and that is that the bottom and the sides of the antennas are required to be screened from public view. And here, I believe the bottom of the antennas are not proposed to be screened, and Mr. Colasardo reviewed with the board the logistic problems with that, and that if you did put a a bottom panel across, it could possibly collect ice, water, or debris and affect the efficiency of the system. So that's really the three C variances that are being sought. And I believe those variances are grantable under the C2 criteria. As the board knows, with a C2 variance, there doesn't have to be any proof of hardship. It's more of a benefits versus burdens test. And because there's no public here, I'm not going to get into a long discussion about what the requirements are for a C2 variance. I'll just say what the legal framework is, and that is that the application must relate to a specific piece of property, that the purposes of the municipal land use law would be advanced by a deviation of the zoning ordinance requirement, that the variance can be granted without substantial detriment to the public good, that the benefits of the deviation would substantially outweigh any detriment, and finally, that the variance will not substantially impair the intent and purpose of the zone plan. So it's a modified version of the positive and negative criteria tailored to the C2 variance. So let's start with the purposes of the municipal land use law that would be advanced from the deviation of the ordinance. Now, Verizon Wireless holds an FCC license to provide service in this area. So the positive criteria are presumptively met. But beyond that, in our advanced technological society, there is a manifest need for improved wireless telecommunications. They now play a vital role in preserving the health and safety of all U.S. citizens. Mobile phones are routinely used to report traffic accidents, suspected crime activity, drunk drivers. They're used to report medical emergencies and other types of emergencies to the proper authorities. So this advances the following purpose of the municipal land use law, and that is to encourage the appropriate use or development of land in a manner which will promote the public health, safety, welfare, and morals. The second requirement is that the variance can be granted without substantial detriment to the public good. And the courts have found that, generally speaking, the negative criteria pertaining to telecommunications facilities implicates aesthetics. Now, this application, I believe, presents no visual impact issues, as evidenced by the photo simulations that have been provided to the board. The color and the design of the concealment structures harmonizes with the architecture of the building, and this facility is not immediately recognizable as a telecommunications facility by the public. The antennas themselves, the support structures, the conduits, the cables are all invisible to the public. And the small size of the equipment is absorbed into the mass of this very large building. The largest piece of equipment has been placed furthest away from the edge of the building in order to minimize its visibility. And I believe the rooftop equipment will not be visible from a public right-of-way. It may be visible from certain other locations, but I don't believe it's going to be visible from a public street. This stealth installation does not cause any damage to the character of the neighborhood, and I believe it does not change the visual quality of the site.
Dave, let me just interrupt you. You've given your view, and I think it's borne out by the visual analysis that there's essentially no adverse visual impact associated with the facility as a whole. That would specifically stand true. You commented on the equipment, but the 1-foot deviation from a visibility perspective, it would not, at least in my view, whether you share it or not, would not be even noticeable to an average person. You wouldn't be able to tell that there's a visual impact associated with the 1-foot deviation, correct?
Right. I don't think it's noticeable. And even so, even if it is noticeable, there's a distinction between visibility and visual impact. Just because you can see something doesn't mean it's necessarily impactful. I think, a dumpster that wasn't screened certainly would have a visual impact, but these antennas that exceed the height of the building by 1 foot, no, certainly not a visual impact.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Now, let's move away from visibility or visual impact issues and talk about some of the other types of impacts that we might expect. Now, this proposal does not subtract from the site's parking supply. It doesn't disrupt the way this site functions or any other neighboring site might function. The small increase in height that we're talking about does not disrupt any important views. It doesn't block air or light onto surrounding properties. And this base station is an unmanned facility. Therefore, there's no proposed increase in population or employment at the site. The use requires it requires virtually no increased demand of municipal services. It certainly doesn't require any sewer service or water supply, and there's virtually no traffic impact associated with this use. You only have infrequent maintenance visits by a technician. Also, this use does not generate any noise, vibration, smoke, odors, dust, fumes, or any other objectionable influences. It's a very passive use. And you heard testimony it's going to operate within FCC standards for RF emissions. I believe the applicant has presented to the board the least intrusive method of providing service into the area. The third requirement is that the benefits of the deviation would substantially outweigh any detriment. And I believe this is the better plan for the property. The 1-foot deviation is a product of the size of the antennas needed for that optimal coverage. And this minimal increase is barely detectable. The 4-foot increase in the height of the equipment over the permitted use, or I should say, over the permitted height, is a function of the height of the existing roof deck and the size of the equipment cabinet. So nothing could really be done about that. If you place the equipment on the roof, it's going to exceed the 80-foot height requirement. The only thing you could do is attempt to locate it in an area that's not visible to the public, and I think that's been accomplished. And the benefit of installing the antennas and equipment with this minimal increase in height, I think that the benefit exceeds any perceived detriment with that small height increase. This proposal provides the benefit of continuing to provide reliable service in the area. This is a replacement site, so you do have that continued enhanced 911 service, safe, secure, and on-demand wireless communications, increased work productivity and efficiency, and just enhanced public safety. So I can't identify any public detriments that would arise from the granting these variances. So I'm going to suggest to the board those public benefits that are conferred far outweigh any perceived detriment.
Just before you leave that, Dave, then you would be of the opinion that the public benefits in not screening the bottom of the antenna, those benefits, for the reasons articulated by Mr. Colasurdo, outweigh any detriments by not screening it, correct?
Correct. I think the benefit would be only minimal. It would be from only locations very close to the building with passersby looking up at the bottom of the antenna. So again, only a minimal benefit there. So I'll just conclude by saying the intent of the ordinance, as I see it, the way I interpret the ordinance, the intent is to permit wireless telecom facilities within the redevelopment area while minimizing visual impacts. And I believe this has been achieved through the strategic placement of the antennas on the facade of the building and the concealment of the antennas. The variances, again, I believe are minor in nature, and they're necessary to produce the best design solution for this stealth concealment structure.
Lastly, Dave, just before we open it up to questions, if any, you do place some, I assume, significant planning significance on the fact that the township was under no obligation to ultimately make this a permitted use, but presumably recognizing the need for wireless and choosing this specific building, made the legislative determination to make this a permitted use. That's significant to you from a planning perspective?
Oh, yes. I think that, both the applicant and the governing body work together to come up with the best solution to providing or continue to provide that reliable service to the area. So we do have that consensus building that planners hope to achieve, and that's exactly what's been done here.
Mr. Chairman, nothing further for Mr. Carlback.
Questions from the board?
I do have one question. It sounded like the township came up with this, we need this wireless ordinance, we need the plan, the redevelopment plan amended to allow wireless first, before we got any bites from a Verizon or an AT&T to do this?
No, you should recall, there was a Verizon antenna on the property.
Okay.
And then the property was redeveloped.
Okay,
We
so
adopted,
now-
and after we adopted the redevelopment plan, Verizon said, you know, we really need that site.
Yeah.
So we amended the redevelopment plan and added the language, particularly the stealth language, which honestly, Verizon was not supportive of it.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
the township was pretty adamant that we wanted, you know, that it would be stealth, and we wanted to limit the height of the antennas and the equipment.
Mhm.
So that's how we came to where we are today.
Yep. And when was the redevelopment plan amended?
I have that answer. It was July 26, 2022.
There you go.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Any questions from the public of this witness? You have to ask. Any question, or any comments from the public about this application? I see none. Counselor, would you like to sum up?
I would like to, yes. First of all, I thank the board for the attention that it's given to this application, and thank the board and its professionals, and before the application got here, to Ms. Talley specifically about her efforts collaboratively, I think is referred to by myself and Mr. Carlback in, I think, arriving at a good place. I want to take this brief opportunity to put the application in some final perspective. It's not necessarily, this application's not about what I think, but what I can respectfully suggest to you is I've been presenting wireless applications for 35 years. And I must honestly say, I think from a visual perspective and a design perspective, I think this is among the better designed facilities that I've seen. And that process was not arrived at in any frivolous manner. I think Janice just articulated the process as we went through it, which involved us coming to the township. We were originally on a different building, the township suggesting that the west parcel was the more appropriate parcel, and frankly, holding our feet to the fire in terms of what the design should entail. And I think what Mr. Carlback, I think if we take, aside from the articulation of the statutory criteria, but if we take one thing, or one conclusion from Mr. Carlback's testimony, is the focus on all of these wireless cases when you're looking at a rooftop facility is what's the visual impact? Because I think anyone who looks at the application objectively is compelled to come to a conclusion that there are no other impacts. The concern and the relevant inquiry is what's the visual impact? And I think in this particular case, I don't think by any stretch of the imagination we can conclude that there is no visual impact. And not only, and this is what I was trying to ask Mr. Carlback, not only is there's no visual impact with the design of the facility itself, but there's no visual impact associated with the 3 deviations. There's no visual impact associated with the location of the equipment. There's no visual impact associated with the 1-foot deviation. When you look at the visual analysis, which you all had the opportunity to look at very closely, I myself, if you didn't know from the visual analysis that there was a 1-foot deviation, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find it. And I don't think you can certainly find that there's a visual impact associated with the 1-foot deviation. And lastly, I do not think that there's any visual impact associated with the bottom of the antennas not being screened from public good. You would have to look up 70 feet in the air specifically to look for that, to really search and find for a visual impact. So if the focus and the crux of the inquiry is there an adverse visual impact? Is there a detriment to the public good? I would respectfully suggest to you that there is no visual impact associated with the facility as a whole or with the deviations. As to the need for the facility, I would make two comments, and one's a non-legal comment. But for as long as I've been doing it, I say this to respected members of the board. If Verizon didn't need the facility, why, let's ask ourselves the very rational question. Why would Verizon be spending the significant resources, both from appearing before the board, leasing, renting the property, and all of the costs that are associated with the development of the site, if it didn't need the site? The reason we're here is because there is a true, legitimate, documented basis, because we're running out of capacity. Mr. Peterson went through that for about over an hour. And the reality is, as much as we sometimes want to rail against people sitting at a restaurant looking at their mobile phone, that's the reality of our society nowadays, with the increased reliance on mobile communication services. And this is a site that is necessitated by that, because we've exhausted every possibility in conjunction with our existing sites. So I think I've addressed visual impact. I've addressed the need for the site. Let me conclude with three other comments. I do think it is most significant, both from a planning and a legal perspective, that the township, in a collaborative process with the applicant, made this a permitted use. The reality of the fact is that if the township did not amend the redevelopment plan, we would have had no ability to get any relief to put wireless communication services on this property, because you can't get a use variance or a D variance where there's a redevelopment plan in place. So the township made that decision and made it a permitted use. That is significant from both a legal and planning perspective. Two final comments. I don't take lightly the positive review report from your Historic Preservation Commission, who issued a report that you all have, essentially recommending approval of the application. I think that's significant from a visual and planning perspective, and I think it represents an acknowledgement of the appropriate positive design that has been deployed in conjunction with this matter. And lastly, I know we've spent a lot of time on electromagnetic fields and all of that, and I sincerely hope that, not because, I think we've gone beyond what we needed to do, but I understand from a visceral reaction why you want to make those inquiries. The fact is that no board can deny an application based on electromagnetic fields to the extent under the Telecommunications Act that such facilities comply with emissions. That's the law. But I think we've come here in good faith, and I think proven to you very clear and convincingly that we're talking about a standard here of 0.14 out of 100%, to give you the comfort level that we're in strict compliance. So what I would urge you, based on all of the foregoing and the expert testimony that has been presented, is that you approve the application as submitted, subject to the provision that we will enter into an encroachment agreement, which has been agreed to in principle with the adjoining property owner. That was identified by Ms. Talley. I've had communications with your counsel about that and have, as a courtesy, given them a heads up that we have substantially arrived at that agreement, subject to finalization and obviously subject to board approval. I think that's the appropriate condition. And I believe that there was, and I don't know that I advised your counsel, I believe that the HPC had made a recommendation that Verizon agree to be responsible for the continued maintenance of the concealment during the life of the facility. I frankly forgot to mention that to you this afternoon, but we stipulate to conformance with that condition likewise. That's it, I'm sorry.
Okay. Thoughts from the board?
All the technology, it's nice to see it's not for
It's good for the labor market, right?
I would just like to say, we do appreciate,
I've known Iris for 20, 30 years, so she knows the cadence of my voice by now.
I would just like to say that, while I don't recall the HBC recommending the plan, I do recall a general consensus that the visual impact was minimal, and a general impression that the commission was satisfied with the design, and we do appreciate the stipulation of the continued maintenance of the site.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I wish the bottom could be screened, but because I do think there's a visual impact, I appreciate your point that you have to look up, but I mean, when I look at all the visuals that have been presented to us, you can see it from a ways off, and you can see the bottoms of those antennas hanging out underneath the screening. So I don't love that, but at the same time, health and safety of the people walking under it is more important to me than having the screen. And, you know, I'm moved that I would not want ice and snow to build up under there and have that fall on somebody, because I think that would be way worse than any sort of visual impact. I appreciate that it does, everything else with the screening does minimize the look, and it does blend nicely with the building. I see the commission, the Historic Preservation Commission did support the proposal, I think was the language, at least that was in the memo that we received. So that gives me some comfort that not only do I find it that it visually works, but you know, the folks that have a lot of expertise in looks and also agree with that. So with that, I mean, I would support the application. And if there's no more comments, I would move to approve the application with the stipulations you've made and with our normal conditions. Mr. Neese.
I don't have my file. I don't have my file, but my recollection, and I discussed with counsel today, that the board will get a copy of the encroachment agreement and get that, and that encroachment agreement will be reviewed, will be recorded, and I don't think there was any other condition other than what you and I talked about this afternoon. So to the extent my notes reflect an additional condition that we discussed, I think you're not going to jump up and down if I include that in the potential resolution.
I haven't jumped up and down yet, so I don't think I'm going to start
Okay.
there. Especially if I get an approval.
I would second the chair's motion. Oh, pardon me, Mayor, if you want to.
No, I was just getting ready to do the same thing, so yes.
I second the chair's motion.
Quick clarification before we continue.
Sure.
Do those provisions include the notion that if, for any reason, Verizon falls out of FCC compliance, that we're made aware?
Mr. Schneider?
Even though it's not likely, I appreciate the confidence. I just want to make sure I understand.
I didn't hear what you
I'm sorry, I want to make sure that we're all clear, not just me. Trust everyone would agree with this. If in the surprise event that Verizon is out of compliance with the FCC, that we have some mechanism of being made aware.
Okay.
I think that's reasonable.
And I actually, I do remember one additional condition, and that related to when you go to the building department that you will present an EMF report for each new facility, I think is probably how.
I think we talked about the initial permit, right? The initial building permit will submit a report.
Right, but if you have to go back to the building department for any additional, you're going to have to provide the department with an updated version.
So when you switch out antennas.
Right.
I'm sorry?
When you switch out antennas, 10 years down the line, I can see.
Switch out or add?
Either.
Could be either. I mean,
Probably
I think if you're
add,
adding
but-
antennas, you probably have to come back here.
EMF report.
Well, I guess my point is if I switch out Model A for Model B and it's the same, am I going to have to do a new EMF report every time I use a new updated model?
Well, you know what would help? If you submit a letter saying that the output is the same, I think you accomplish that.
Okay.
Because the layperson probably wouldn't know that.
Janice, what's an EMF report?
Electromagnetic
Oh.
frequency.
Oh, that's what we're talking about here,
Yeah,
okay.
EMF.
Acronyms, I know.
Okay, I think we've got clarification, so I'll amend my motion to include all of those items we just discussed.
And I will second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay.
Thank you.
All right, have a good evening.
Thank you.
Okay, we don't have any new business. Do we have any committee reports?
I have a question,
No?
Mr. Chair.
Sure, Mayor.
Yes, please. So we were all presented with, I believe, an extensive report from the Housing Commission.
Yes.
So I just wanted to know, under new business, is there anything that we should discuss here or acknowledge that we received it, or what should we do with the extensive report? I know they're very excited to try to work with us in terms of affordable housing things, and I looked through here and I'm just not certain, is there anything in here that would be helpful for us to talk about? Or mostly it looked like a lot of things maybe that would go to zoning or other areas, but I just wanted to find out your opinion. I know, Janice, you serve on that
Right.
committee as well.
The Housing Commission is well aware of the work that we're doing in terms of preparing a new housing element and fair share plan. And I think that report was their recommendation to the planning board on some of the things that they think that the planning board should consider as they work on the plan.
It's a little
and
bit
this
more
is-
than that, though, right? Because as I read, there's a lot of things in here that I'm not sure that are in the purview of the planning board.
Right, and that's
what I
why it
was
also
trying-
went to the council, because they
Okay.
took this as an opportunity to let you know what some of their ideas are. And they want to work with both boards. The planning board, there's some larger issues, but they also know, and we all know, that the housing plan is time critical. So that's obviously the priority.
Kind of what, sorry?
It's time critical.
Mm-hmm.
The council has a resolution that they have to approve this month by January 30th.
Yes.
To be submitted to the state.
Yes.
Accepting the housing obligation of 135 units that need to be rehabbed. That's the first critical.
Yeah.
132.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
that's what our
stand
document
corrected.
said.
So that's the first step, but then there's a series of steps, but the big thing is we have to submit the plan by June 30th.
But I think a
So-
lot of this stuff isn't, I mean, it's presumed that we don't have an obligation for more, and you have to rehab the 132, so that's pretty straightforward, right?
Right.
That's,
But there are, I mean, if we're open to, I certainly have views on some of the stuff that I'd be
Yeah.
happy to discuss,
Yeah.
if you'd
Same.
like.
Same.
so.
And I don't know when we will get a chance to speak about, I mean, some of the stuff is good, and some of the stuff I think is not good, so.
Well, maybe what we should do is, first of all, I know, Thamar, you had asked for information and reports, and I have a whole binder full of reports, which I spoke to our director, Tony Fan today, the director of information, technology and information. And we're going to put all those reports, for anybody who wants to read them, on a share drive
Okay.
for the planning board. My office, we're also working on updating the data in terms of the census data. There's new American Community Survey data that has become available for 2023, so we're updating our charts to include that. And we'll start the discussions, and perhaps we schedule a series of meetings, maybe the second meeting with the planning board of the month, to talk about housing issues as we move ahead. There's a lot of pieces to this puzzle. As you, the focus the past week or two has been transferring all of our affordable housing files from our administrative agent into my office and dealing with maintaining the records and training and how we're going to move forward with our various programs. So that's one piece. You don't really get involved in that, but that's just one component on how we manage our affordable units. But I think it's pretty important because clearly we have an investment in our affordable units in Montclair. And we want to make sure that those units continue to provide quality housing for the people of Montclair, and that we expand it where feasible.
How does the step that we're at now, I guess, with your office, how does that reconcile with the resolution that's on the council's doorstep? Like, does the timing align, or we?
It's just that's just a binding resolution that the council accepts the number, because this is the issue with the housing plan is the document is adopted by the planning board, but it has to be approved by the council.
Sure.
So we have to work hand in hand.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit unique. It's not like a land use plan, which is really the jurisdiction of the planning board.
Got it.
So that's where we are. Now that we're here with the new year, we'll start scheduling some of these discussions and moving forward.
And Janice, just a question. So
Yeah.
it's just a pro forma for the council to accept the numbers by the DCA. There'd be no debate about it, correct?
I would hope.
Pretty much.
I can't speak for the council.
So,
This
I
isn't-
mean, we should do
never
that
know.
sooner rather than later, so that we're
I
not
have
like
it
at
on,
the last
I
minute.
submitted it, I think it's on your
It's
agenda
for
for tomorrow night.
It
Is it?
is,
Okay.
yeah, it's on
If you
the
want to take
agenda for
action
tomorrow
on it, that's
night.
fine. If you want to discuss it, that's fine. But yes,
It's on for
is it,
tomorrow.
number one, this is a new process. After 35, 40 years of affordable housing, we've got a whole new process. So I can't tell you if it's pro forma. I think it should be.
Yeah.
Particularly since I think our number is reasonable and achievable and not a huge burden to the municipality. So.
So, Mr. Chair, I appreciate you for recognizing me. Planner Tally, I appreciate you. And so, if I understand correctly, we're going to move forward and we will start scheduling some of these things, maybe at the second meeting of the month or something, so that we can have some discussion about the concerns that were presented here, or the suggestions that.
Right.
Okay. Thank you so much.
And it sounds like we're going to have some more information as well to look at, which I think will be helpful. So thank you, Mr.
Thank
Campbell,
you.
for raising that as well, and thank you, Mayor, for raising the question.
And Janice, I had asked for, what's her name, Katja, to give me the Rutgers reports.
Did she give it to
She
you?
did, so
Okay.
you're copied on that. That's interesting information as well. You might want to include in that binder. So this will be done by the full council, not any subcommittee, as we look at this. Is that true?
I think it's a big enough issue
Yeah.
at this point, and if we can schedule it for the full board,
Yeah.
I prefer to do it that way.
Yeah,
I would too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we include the recommendations from the zoning board that they send out annually in those conversations?
No,
Okay.
no, that's another, I don't want to, that doesn't have to be a part of the housing plan. That's
Right.
more of changes to the zoning ordinance. We're working on it.
Sure.
But I think let's separate the two. That is important, but I think it's more critical that we address the housing issues, because again, we have a deadline.
Yeah.
More time critical.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes, time critical.
Okay.
Yes, I think
Mr.
you
Gianwali.
passed around some of this stuff before, but it's really, really small print on the bottom of the letter. there's some footnotes. I would assume that I
Yeah.
think you've circulated some of this stuff already. It's in that.
Well, that's what I had just mentioned. I have
The
some of the
Blaustein
stuff, the
project?
Blaustein
Yeah,
stuff she
right.
gave me.
So that's why I
Yeah.
think if I'm going to create a shared drive and I'll have links to all those
Yeah, that'd be
articles,
good.
there's a lot of,
Yeah.
I get information almost, on a daily or weekly basis. There's a report that came across my desk today from the Harvard Joint Institute of Housing, that I might have screwed up the name, but they do some excellent research. And their latest research is that come over the next 10 years, the number of new households forming is going to start to decline. Housing demand is anticipated to decline. So, we have to not just plan for, what's been occurring over the last 10 years, but in anticipating that we're not going to have this housing bubble. It's going to end. So it just puts a different curve on this whole discussion of housing and housing demand and designing for it, so.
Is that specific to different regions of the country, or is it just in general?
It's in general.
Okay, because I could see that nationally maybe being a trend, but perhaps certain certain areas.
I think it has.
It's
to do with-
demographic, like people are getting older and they're dying off, and, that's what's
That's
happening.
exactly what the report
And people are having less children, so of
the
course
baby
it's good.
boom.
Yeah.
But certain areas will probably continue to be.
It also
Montclair
incorporated,
will be one of them. That will be a desirable location, I would think.
it also added changes in immigration patterns. And if immigration patterns decline, as they very well may, it's going to, the number of new households and housing demand is going to decline significantly more so than it has in probably the past 30 years. So it's some really interesting data, and I will post all this information for those of you who want to read it.
And Janice, the ultimate goal of the housing plan, we're calling it, what is that in a nutshell?
I think is to have a comprehensive housing policy. Number one, affordable housing
But
is an
that's only a
issue.
small part of it. It's not
Is a
just,
part
the
of it.
only thing is not affordable
Maybe
housing.
that's all we really have to do is the affordable housing part of it, but I think it's part of a bigger issue. The need for starter homes, we've heard about that. How you look at housing policy in terms of demographic trends and forecasts. So I wouldn't say, normally most towns just say, okay, we have a housing obligation, where are we going to put it? Where are we going to, I think that we can have a more robust discussion and say, what are our housing needs? Not just, for low-income households and moderate-income households, but for seniors, and for,
Missing middle.
missing middle, right? Okay? And it doesn't have to be a huge, these don't have to be huge numbers. We are looking at, through GIS, we can identify which blocks have a higher percentage of two-family houses existing, zoned for one family, and maybe that's an opportunity to look at that block and change it into a two-family zone to help address that missing middle. So it's very incremental. It's not huge changes that we're talking about here. So I think that what you want to do is identify the needs and the trends and the forecasts, come up with a policy that meets those, but also preserves, Montclair for what it is. It's a very unique, attractive town, a community, a neighborhood for everybody. So, okay. And I'll shut up now.
Well said.
Any other committee reports, or any committee reports?
I had a question about the planning board committees. Now that Jeff is not here, you need to replace him, I guess. You had sent out the planning board committees for 2025, but
Yeah,
Jeff is
so-
on there under planning board revisions
think-
committee.
On the revisions, Jeff is on the revisions committee, so we need a new person for the revisions committee. And we have an empty spot on the bylaws committee. So I don't know if you want to fill that spot right now. There is an opening on the planning board, so you can think about it.
Yeah, just with respect to that opening, I've asked the clerk to give me all the most recent volunteer forms that have been submitted where people have the planning board as their number one choice.
Okay.
So that we can look at who wants to be on the board as their number one choice, and then the council will have to figure out
Good.
who they want to
I
appoint.
just would suggest that we move Jake up to.
Yeah, I
first
agree
alternate,
100%.
From second alternate.
I would suggest that too.
100%, yeah. I don't know that the council quite understands that, but we need to make sure that they do, yeah.
I appreciate that.
And I also spoke to Janice before we got started with the meeting about the possibility of an individual who's interested in joining the planning board, who would also be interested in serving on the environmental commission. And so that's something that I'm looking into too, because I understand that there's a need to do that, and I'm trying to get that done. So this might be that time.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Can we go back to the housing thing for a moment? Sorry, it's like a passion area for me. Do we, in your experience, do you believe that we can make our way across the finish line in these meetings, like even if we schedule it out? Is it like,
Yeah.
how feasible is it, in your opinion?
I think absolutely we
Okay.
can do that. Okay?
Okay.
The difficulty is, I think we'll be able to do this. We're going to have to coordinate with the council.
Got it.
Because, and that's why I want to get this done sooner rather than later.
I'm sorry, what was the question? I didn't
How
really.
feasible is it that we can make our way across the finish line in like these housing conversations, whether,
We don't have a choice. That's the thing. When you have when the state law says it must be submitted by June 30th.
Yeah.
let me say
you
it
can't-
differently,
Yeah.
That means it has to be
a
approved.
submission that we're proud of, right? Not just submitting something, right?
Right.
Yes.
If we need to, we can always convene an ad hoc subcommittee of this body
Okay.
to, if we're getting to the point where we don't feel like we're going to make it as a board, because
That's what-
we have a
yeah.
lot of opinions and, we like to debate things, which I think is good. That's one of my favorite things about this board, quite honestly.
Yeah.
But if we start looking that we're not going to make that deadline or we're not going to be happy with the document,
Yeah.
we'll create a subcommittee
Got
of
it.
folks to hash through it and bubble things up to the full board.
And quite honestly, you adopt the plan. If a year out, you want to make an amendment to it because you
You
had
can do
time to
that.
study an aspect of it, you can always amend it.
Got it.
I don't
Right.
think.
We're not
yeah,
locked into it, okay.
Nope.
Because you don't have a new construction obligation, I don't think you're going to have the pressure and the controversy that some other municipalities have.
Good point.
There's no threat.
Yeah.
So Janice, it strikes me it's up to you to start giving us the data, right? Yeah, so that's kind of the first thing, we have to digest
Right,
this
and
data.
we're working on it.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
Again, the 2023 data became available in December, so we're working on that. Okay?
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Bills.
Is there a motion to pay the bills?
Well, the bills did appear in order, Mr. Neese, so I would make a motion to approve the bills.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
I'm so glad our bills were in order this month as opposed to other months. Okay, Mike?
With that, I would move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Happy New Year.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.